morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. Every generation has introduced at least one of what fans would refer to as Pseudo Legendary Pokemon. Pseudo, of course, meaning fake, like Pseudo-Wudo. Yeah, he's not actually made out of wood. With base stat totals of 600, these are widely considered to be each region's strongest non-legendary Pokemon, and ironically, at times they can be stronger than actual legendary Pokemon. So let's take a deeper look at some cool facts about all 10 of them. Dragonite, being the original, naturally comes first, and with it being from the first gen, of course there are some odd features from its design that it later left behind. Most notably, this ridge of scoliosis on its back. Kinda looks like me after a long day of recording. Now, lots of Gen 1 Pokemon's back sprites featured random design elements that weren't supposed to be in the final design, but in Dragonite's case, this ridge can also be seen from the front of its Japan-exclusive red and green sprite. But this ridge is never seen in any official artwork of Dragonite even as far back as 1996. This further solidifies the conspiracy theory that Gen 1 sprites were created by an unpaid intern. Dragonite and its pre-evolution Dragonair also had an odd quirk where their catch rates were lowered in Pokemon Yellow. Dragonairs went from 45 down to 27, making it the hardest Pokemon to catch in the Kanto Safari Zone, slightly beating out Chansey. Dragonite's catch rate was lowered from 45 to 9, but one catch, Dragonite doesn't actually appear anywhere in the wild, so this change was completely meaningless. Both of their catch rates would be reverted to 45 for future gens, though this still wouldn't mean anything for Dragonite until Black and White came out. Those were actually the very first games where Dragonite could be caught in the wild as one of the game's many monster encounters. That's not an official term, I just came up with it to describe the many 1% catches in that game. Yes, Dragonite can only be found 1% of the time by fishing with the Super Rod inside of a rippling water tile, and considering how hard it can be to get these things to spawn, this may be one of the most annoying encounters of all time. But your patience may be rewarded, as the wild Dragonite can range from level 50 to level 70, all but cutting out any grinding you need to do. But hey, even if you're unlucky and fish up the level 50 Dragonite, at least you'll have something in common with Lance. Like cheating! Tyranitar is the first of only 2 non-dragon type pseudo-legendaries, with Metagross being the second, but hey, wait your turn! Tyranitar is also one of 2 pseudos to have both a Mega Evolution and a Paradox relative, along with Salamence. Despite all this love it's gotten from Game Freak though, you may be surprised to find out that Tyranitar originally wasn't going to be a Pokemon at all. In fact, it was designed by Ken Sugimori as an original creation not related to Pokemon. He published the design in a Japanese magazine in 1997, along with what appears to be a beta Hitmontop. Tyranitar's family also seems to have an odd insect theme going on, with Larvitar coming from the word larva, Pupitar coming from pupa, or the cocoon stage, and even Mega Tyranitar appears to have wings sprouting from its back, similar to a butterfly. And, I don't know, maybe I'm dumb, but it took me a long time to actually notice that Tyranitar's torso is actually just Pupitar's leftover shell. In its shiny form, its belly even turns purple, just like Pupitar does. Please tell me I'm not the only one to not notice this. Salamence holds the record for being the earliest obtainable pseudo-legendary in any game, and also the lowest leveled one you can get legitimately. Of course, I'm referring to the infamous SOS Encounter Salamence from Alola Route 3, which can be summoned as low as level 9. That's 41 whole levels below where it should normally evolve, so honestly, if you ever manage to catch this thing, it might be more valuable to just not level it up. Salamence isn't just an under-leveled king though, he's also a short king. At 4 foot 11 inches, or 1.5 meters, Salamence holds the title of smallest pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Most people watching this video are probably taller than Salamence. So if your childhood dream was to ride on the back of this Pokemon one day, well, I hate to tell you that it's probably not happening. Also, Salamence doesn't exist, so even if you were tall, you still couldn't do it. Metagross is the only pseudo-legendary who is completely unobtainable during the main story without an event or transferring in its debut generation. Although Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did somewhat rectify this with a limited time distribution where you could start the game with a shiny Beldum. This shiny Beldum, or its evolutions, would even unlock some secret dialogue with Steven Stone later in the game, where he remarks on how it reminds him of a time where he fought alongside a trainer with a black Charizard, making a reference to Alon from the Pokemon XY anime and Mega Evolution series. To this day, Metagross is still one of the rarest pseudo-legendaries that can be found fully evolved in the wild, as it only appears in 2 locations across the entire Pokemon world: the Giant Chasm in the Unova region and Snowslide Slope in the Crown Tundra. The Metagross family also has the lowest catch rate of all pseudo-legendary Pokemon, with 3. Because of this, Beldum and Metang are tied with the 4 Tapus for the hardest possible catches in the entire franchise. If you try to catch them in a Beast Ball in Sun and Moon, they'll have a catch rate of 0.3. Definitely frustrating, but something you can brag about nonetheless. One of the things that people love to rag on Garchomp for is its rather underwhelming shiny form, and I think Game Freak is well aware of this. Because when you line up the shiny forms from Gen 4 to the current day, they've actually been gradually darkening it to help differentiate it from the base form. It used to be a slightly darker shade of blue, but now it's slowly been transitioning to a more slate gray look. It's also the only pseudo-legendary to possess a gender difference. But like other Mega Evolutions, the Mega form takes this away. And hey, it's time for another haha funny Pokedex moment, because Garchomp is described to fly at Mach 1 speed. Dragonite, on the other hand, can fly at Mach 2 speed, but has a lower speed stat than Garchomp, ironically. It's just one of those little things that's always gonna be funny. I hope you've learned a lot so far. If you have, definitely subscribe to the channel so you'll always be in the loop for new videos just like this one. You can impress your friends with all of your worldly Pokemon knowledge. Hydreigon is not just the latest evolving pseudo-legendary Pokemon, but the latest evolving of all Pokemon in existence, reaching its final form at level 64. But Getsus said, screw that, I'm the final boss, I don't have to play by the rules. According to Ken Sugimori, the Hydreigon family was originally going to be based on different types of military tanks, but the idea was thrown out relatively early in development. Their designs would then be resurrected and altered late in development, taking more inspiration from the Japanese legend of Yamata no Orochi, a red-eyed 8-headed dragon. Sugimori states that the 8 heads would have looked a bit too off-putting for younger players, and probably much harder to animate, so most of the heads were replaced with these, wing-like thingies on its back. The tread patterns running down its body also serves as a reference to the original idea of it being inspired by tanks. Goodra is the only pseudo-legendary Pokemon that requires an extra step in order to evolve rather than just leveling up, as it must also be raining in the area, but the rain can't be triggered by a move or ability during the battle. Ash's Goodra completely ignored this subtext though, as it was able to evolve from Sliggoo after using its own rain dance. So, more privilege for the protagonist, I guess. It's also the only pseudo-legendary without a secondary typing, unless you count Hisuian Goodra. Goodra was also the only pseudo-legendary without an immunity to at least one type, but adding Steel with the Hisuian form also rectified that. Goodra's first form, Gumi, is also frequently referred to by the Pokedex as the weakest dragon type. But this is also not technically correct, as Noibat, who was introduced in the same generation, has a lower base stat total than Gumi. And since then, Dreepy, Frigibax, and Applin have all been introduced with lower base stat totals as well. Plus, Applin hardly has any attacking moves at all, so you wouldn't think anybody would consider Gumi weaker than it. Yet the Pokemon Sword Dex still gives the title to Gumi. So if your haters have you down, just remember you might evolve into a pseudo-legendary one day. One of the least competitively viable pseudo-legendaries, but a pseudo-legendary nonetheless. Despite Kommo-o's name being a reference to the mythical Hawaiian creature called the Mo-o, design-wise it hardly takes inspiration from them at all, other than being somewhat reptilian-looking. Another Pokemon introduced in Alola, that being Salazzle, is actually a much closer depiction of the Mo-o both in terms of design and lore. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the lowest level Jangmo-o that you can find in Vast Pony Canyon is level 43, which means you'd only have to level it up twice for it to reach its final form. Not counting the Route 3 Salamence from these games, this is the shortest amount of time separating a pseudo-legendary's base form from its final form. And this record is quite literally unbreakable since it has to evolve twice. It's a bit ironic that Jangmo-o gets so little spotlight in its debut gen though, considering that according to Shigeru Omori, it was the very first Generation 7 Pokemon to be designed. According to the 2020 Pokemon of the Year poll, Dragapult is the most popular Generation 8 Pokemon, and the 11th most popular Pokemon overall. However, it was not the most popular pseudo-legendary. That honor went to Garchomp, who ranked 7th with 61,000 votes to Dragapult's 57,000. Despite being the largest pseudo-legendary Pokemon, measuring nearly 10 feet or 3 meters, it's actually the lightest pseudo-legendary and is the only one that isn't able to learn the move Earthquake. And perhaps most interestingly, Dragapult is based on an extinct amphibian known as the Diplocalus, whose full tail fossils were never found, explaining both the ghost typing and its spooky translucent tail. And finally, we've arrived at our last pseudo-legendary Pokemon, Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur, like Tyranitar, takes some inspiration from kaiju monsters in its design. In fact, it evolving from Arctibax at level 54 may be a reference to 1954, the year the first Godzilla film came out. Its signature ability Thermal Exchange also references how real-life reptiles and dinosaurs would use large quills or appendages to regulate their body temperatures. The dinosaur that closest resembles Baxcalibur is the Concavinator, who likewise had a large crest on its back. The fossils of this dinosaur were first discovered in Spain, so there's an easy connection to Paldea as well. I don't know about you guys, but I always love when stuff in the real world translates over like this. And with that, you now, hopefully, know a lot more about Pseudo Legendary Pokemon. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like in this video and subscribe for more great videos just like this one. I'll see you guys next time.